Right now, at this very moment, you have access to more information than any human brain in history ever did. Every question you could possibly think of is answered in seconds. Every book, every idea, every discovery is at your fingertips. And when you look around, are we wiser? Are we living a more meaningful life? Are we making better decisions? Something doesn't add up. We gained information, and yet, somewhere along the way, quietly, we lost wisdom. And today I want to talk about what happened, how it started, and eventually what it cost us. To understand what we actually lost, we first have to understand what wisdom actually was. Because we've watered down the word so much that it barely means anything anymore. In ancient Greece, wisdom was not a personality trait, it was a discipline. And famous thinkers like Socrates dedicated his entire life to it, not accumulating facts, but rather learning how to live with it rightfully and meaningfully. He famously said, "The only true wisdom is to know that you know nothing." Now, think of that for a moment. The wisest man in Athens did not describe wisdom as knowing more, but rather understanding your limits of what you know. And wisdom began with humility. Meanwhile, in the Islamic Golden Age, between the 8th century and the 13th century, wisdom had an even more structured role. Scholars like Al-Ghazali drew a clear distinction between knowledge, ilm, and wisdom, hikmah. Knowledge was the accumulation of facts and science, whereas wisdom was learning how to live with it. And which of them brought you closer to the truth and which led you astray? Al-Ghazali, in his masterwork Ihya Ulumuddin, writes, "Knowledge without action is vanity, and action without knowledge is insanity." This was a tradition that produced astronomy, medicine, mathematics, philosophy, and even more, and yet insisted that all of this should be grounded in true spiritual and moral wisdom. The two were inseparable. You could not be a great scholar without being a person of character. So when exactly did information and knowledge begin to separate? The fracture started gradually with the scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th century. This was not a bad thing. The inventions of Galileo, Copernicus, and Newton were incredible. But something subtle shifted in how knowledge was valued. Knowledge became more verifiable, quantifiable, and measurable. And anything that could not be measured, like virtue, meaning, or moral insight, began to be treated as second class. The famous philosopher T.S. Eliot saw this coming back then, and he wrote something incredible. In 1934, he wrote, "Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information?" 1934. He was writing this before the internet, before the smartphones, before social media, or anything that we have now. And he was quietly mourning for the loss. He saw a three-tier descent. First it was wisdom, then it was knowledge, and then it was information. And he saw humanity getting down the ladder in real time. Then came the 20th century. The printing press had already democratized knowledge. Radio, television, and eventually the internet accelerated it beyond anything Eliot could have ever imagined. Information became not just accessible, it became constant, inescapable, and overwhelming. And in that flood, wisdom, which requires time, patience, moral insight, and humility, just drowned. Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, one of the greatest poets to ever live, writing in the 13th century, he could have not known about Twitter or YouTube. However, he wrote about something incredible. He understood what would happen if there is noise, if the human soul is distracted from what it is meant not to be distracted from. He wrote, "The mind is like a treasury, but the heart is the keeper of the treasury's key." The mind can store everything, every fact, every knowledge, every equation, every formula. However, the heart is the key to it. Without a proper heart, without a clear heart, you would have no idea what to do with this knowledge. And that is exactly what has happened. We filled ourselves with infinite information, and just deleted the part that knew what to do with this information. Think about all the opinions you've read this week, different headlines, different articles, different predictions, tweets, opinions and perspectives of different people from around the world. And if you ask yourself, has it made you a better person? Has it helped you take better decisions? The answer would be probably no. Because information without wisdom does not actually build anything. It just keeps accumulating. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Wisdom has always been very hard to obtain. Not because it is hidden, but because it requires things that we are not ready to give up. It requires silence, and we're not used to it. The Christian tradition, the Sufi tradition, the Stoic tradition, and even the Buddhist tradition, all of them agreed on this thing. You cannot hear the deeper voice when the surface is constantly churning. It requires suffering, or at least willing to sit with the difficulty rather than scrolling past it. The philosopher Dostoevsky wrote, "Pain and suffering are always inevitable for a large intelligence and a deep heart." Dostoevsky was not celebrating pain. He was arguing that people with deep heart, with a great wisdom, cannot live without pain and suffering. And it requires time, real unstructured time, which the modern world has made it seem to be a waste, whereas the ancient civilization used to treat it sacred. Ibn Khaldun, the 14th century Arab historian and one of the earliest sociologists in history, observed that civilizations rise when their people pursue both knowledge and wisdom, and begin to decline when they mistake busyness for progress. We are the most informed generation in history ever, and perhaps the least equipped to answer the really important questions that matters. Why are we here? What should we do with our life? Why do we live? And who do we live for? Information tells you what is, and wisdom tells you what it means and what to do about it. The ancients didn't have search engines. They had something we quietly traded away: the ability to sit with a question long enough for it to teach them something. Maybe the most radical thing that you can do in 2026 is not to consume, but stop, reflect, and question yourself, not about what you know, but whether what you know is actually making you wiser. And there is a clear difference, and it matters more than ever.